is February 20th, and on this day in 1954, the last trolleys departed Frederick on a final round trip to Thurmont and back. I am standing in front of Potomac Edison's Frederick Service Center at 11 in the morning on February 20th, 2024. It was precisely 70 years ago that the last two trolleys left the back of this building on their ceremonial final trip. The building had been the trolley's car barn, or maintenance and storage building, since its construction in 1911. By the time of the last trolley, only passenger cars 171 and 172 were stored here, and the company's freight equipment would occasionally be brought in for maintenance. Of the 6 bays that used to contain nothing but trolleys, only one still had track. The other 5 converted for use by the company's automobiles and trucks. Trolleys 171 and 172, the last 2 passenger cars in operation on what had been an 87.5-mile trolley system in central Maryland, traveled the remaining 17-mile route with company officials, retired employees, and county dignitaries on board. Crowds surrounded the cars as they departed and met the trolleys along their final trip. This line had been essential for decades, but trolleys were being replaced by buses, and even the buses were unable to compete with the growing number of automobiles on the road. The first bus to replace the trolleys had departed at 9:30 in the morning from the same location. However, the bus service was also retired only 1 year later. The trolleys traveled out 5th Street and Rosemont Avenue on their way north through the county. At one point along the trip, the company president R. Paul Smith took a hand at the controls. On board, a teenager working for Hagerstown radio station WJEJ by the name of Carol James interviewed dignitaries and officials along the trip.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Carol James speaking to you from car number 172 of the Hagerstown and Frederick Railway.
The thing I enjoyed the most was when we left Hagerstown and come up over the mountain and went on up through Thurmont when we were younger and had our girlfriends with us, and we thoroughly enjoyed. We always knew we was going to get there and get back safe.
Well, of course, I was raised in Frederick in my younger days and made many trips on it between Frederick and Braddock Heights.
There's a good deal of sentiment attached to seeing the last one fade out of the picture.
Well, a certain amount of nostalgia connected with it was inevitable. It's a mark of progress.
Mr. James, who was born in Frederick and grew up in Hagerstown right along the trolley route, was the son of a Potomac Edison employee, the company that the Hagerstown and Frederick Railway had become. He would go on to become a popular radio DJ in Washington, D.C., and near the end of his life contributed to the history of the Hagerstown and Frederick through the production of the only documentary ever created about the line. At the north end of the trip, the trolleys stopped alongside the Western Maryland Railway Station, where a platform had been constructed for speeches and brief comments by several of the dignitaries, broadcast by several radio stations around the area. The crowd gathered and listened to the speeches that were given despite a light rain that had begun falling that day. This is the site of the photograph that you just saw, 70 years after that image was taken. As you can see, the trolley tracks and the Western Maryland Railway Station are long gone. However, remnants of the trolley line still survive. Once the speeches were done, passengers boarded the cars once again, and they traveled south for a final ceremonial trip, traveling through the communities of Catoctin Furnace, Lewistown, Yellow Springs, and Bethel, finally reaching Frederick once again. The trolley stopped at the campus of Hood College, where students had ridden the trolley to school for decades. A group of students gathered by the tracks and presented flowers and songs to President Smith. It was at this spot where the students said goodbye to the trolleys. The college campus had been constructed beside the existing trolley line, starting in 1914. Since then, several new structures have been constructed, but the trolley route still exists in memory where a sidewalk passes between 2 of the campus buildings. Several of the passengers took the opportunity to climb off of the trolleys here and photograph the events and the girls providing their presentation to President Smith. This would be the last stop before the end of the trip. The trolleys continued south along 5th Street and stopped at the car barn to let their passengers out. A small group of company employees was allowed to take a final trip after the official last trip, while the dignitaries took one of the buses to a banquet celebrating the trolley service. Cars 171 and 172 were then retired. By 1961, the Potomac Edison Company, which had begun as the Frederick and Middletown Railway, was no longer in the railroad business. Eventually, Car 172, despite an effort to save this important car, the last trolley to operate on several of the Hagerstown and Frederick Railway's routes, was lost to vandalism and eventually scrapped. Car 171 survives in private ownership and continues to be preserved. The Hagerstown and Frederick Railway Historical Society exists to preserve this legacy and educate the public about the importance of this line, which is often forgotten, as what remains is slowly lost to development and age. If you would like to learn more about this valuable piece of Central Maryland history, consider a visit to the Boonesboro Trolley Station Museum, which is operated as a partnership between the H&FRHS and the National Road Heritage Foundation. You may also consider a membership to the Hagerstown and Frederick Railway Historical Society. All members receive a quarterly newsletter with articles about the railway, including maps and photographs.